Okay, hi folks. We are pretty much on the hour now, so I think we'll start getting into this. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Chris Saxon. I'm part of Stephen Feuerstein's Oracle Developer Advocate team and part of the Classic Answer team on AskTOM. It's my job to help you get the best out of Oracle database, hopefully have a little bit of fun whilst doing so. So I'm really excited to be here to help answer your questions about SQL in today's office hour session. I also have with me Keith Laker, who's the PM for Analytical SQL. Keith, do you want to say a quick hello, introduce yourself?
Yep, I think I can just about do that at the moment before all the banging restarts on my house refurbishment. So good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks for asking me, Chris. And I'll hand back to you before the banging starts.
Yeah, so Keith's got some builders joining him, so he's got potentially a lot of background noise, but hopefully he'll be able to chip in at particular points. So as I said, these sessions are to answer your questions about SQL. Now, we've had one question come in advance, which I'm going to talk through because it's kind of interesting and there's a lot of facets to it. But if you've got any other questions, burning SQL questions or things that you want to know about, either I cover in the slides, just put them in chat and we'll pick them up in this hour, assuming we've got time. So at this point, I will jump back to the slides and we'll get started properly. So let's jump in and start off with, as I said, we had a question that came in advance. Someone was doing an update of a join like this. So they were joining two tables together. Hi, Sagar, nice to meet you. And when they ran this query, they got an exception, this lovely ORA 1779 exception. Anyone on the call have any idea what that exception is before we reveal what's going on here? Anyone going to take a guess, or are people going to desperately Google what that is before? Key preservation error. Yes, I thought you might get that, Judith. So the problem here is that Oracle database doesn't know which row it's actually going to update. So I'm taking a little guess at what the data looks like here. I'm not sure exactly because they didn't provide, full create table and so on. But based on the query that's shown, I'm going to make some assumptions and say we've got a table that looks a little bit like this. So we've got a table of tasks, then we've got who it's assigned to. So I assume that the ID and name is the person that this task belongs to. And then we've got who their supervisor is and their name. So we can see here, we've got two rows. My boss is Stephen. So I've got two tasks to do lots of stuff, get lots of things done that he's given me. But there's a problem. He's got a different supervisor ID on each row. So I'm assuming that this is kind of the basis of the problem that they were trying to solve here. They had two different IDs assigned to the same person, so they were trying to resolve them. But as Judith says, we've got a key preservation error. When we run this update, then we've got one row mapping to many. And unfortunately, the database isn't able to do the update here. So when we've got the things going on here, we've got the update, we've got to map to exactly one row each time. So you can do an update of a straightforward query, just select from a single table in your update clause. It's not something many people know about, and there aren't that many cases where you would do this, I don't think. But you can also update a join as long as the rows you are changing are protected by a primary or a unique key. That isn't the case here because the supervisor ID, there are many rows for a particular one. So this is why we've got the exception. And so that's the basis of the problem. We're trying to update multiple rows here. So what can we do about it? Well, the first technique we can use is a correlated update. So rather than have our join within the update statement like this, we can have a subquery. So we have the update statement and then set the value in a subquery like this. So we find the name of the supervisor like this. But there's a problem if we just run the update as shown like this. And that is, what if the supervisor has no tasks? Does anyone on the chat want to guess what's going to happen to anyone who's got no tasks? What's going to happen to their supervisor ID? Some thinking going on there. So while you think about this, yes, Tony's got it. It would set it to null. So that's it exactly. We're updating every single row in the table here. So of course, any task where the supervisor doesn't have a matching task that they are assigned, well, this doesn't find anything. So this subquery here returns no values. So it gives null, which means we set the supervisor ID to null. So if we look at our table as a result of that, we're going to end up with something like this. We've sorted out Stephen's IDs, but the big boss, who's got no tasks of his own, he's got supervisor ID of null. So this is a problem, and we don't want to do this. So we only, want to update the rows where the supervisor actually has a task himself, or their own task. So we want to update rows for Stevens because we can see he's got his own task, but not for Big Boss because he has no task. The CEO just sits there just kind of giving out orders, doesn't really do anything themselves. So what we need to do is add an extra where clause to our query. So an exists or an in query, something like this. So we're saying check that the person we're trying to update does actually have a value. So they are not going to be set to null when we run our query. So that's great. We've sorted the query out, or the update out, so it gives the correct results, or the results we would expect. But there's kind of a problem here, and you can kind of see it. We're duplicating this subquery, where it's pretty much exactly the same, both in the set clause and the exists clause. So, we're doubling up on work, which isn't great. So all things being equal, our statement's going to be a lot slower. But also, potentially when we have a correlated update like this, so for every row in the tasks table, we're going to have to run this subquery in the set clause. So when it's just 3 rows, like I've shown, it's going to be quick. Doesn't matter how bad your SQL is. But let's imagine we've got a tasks table with hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of rows in there. For every one of those, or every one of those where the supervisor has their own tasks, we're going to be running this in a query. That can really slow the performance of the query down. So we're querying our inner table. Yeah, and Dennis, you're preempting me. You're figuring out exactly where I'm going to go with this. So as we can see, this is works, but it's potentially very slow. So as Dennis has pointed out in the chat, what we could do instead is go for a merge. So for any of you not familiar with merge, what this allows you to do is like the upsert logic. Insert if not exists, or update if exists type query or type logic. It's the kind of thing that you might have done is like try and insert the row, and if you get the unique key violation, do an update instead, or try and do an update, and if it does nothing, the row count is 0, insert the row instead. Merge allows you to have one statement that does both operations. But what a lot of people don't realize is the insert and update of merge are both optional. So you can have a merge, which only updates rows, or a merge which only inserts rows. Now, personally, I can't really think of any good use cases for an insert-only merge. If anyone in the chat knows of one, I'd be really keen to hear it. But an update-only merge can be really useful. And that helps with this kind of correlated update problem we saw. So what we can do is write the query, or write the merge statement like this instead. So what we've got is, we're saying we've got our task table, the supervisor rows that we want to update, and then the values that they're coming from. So we're doing the join in here, and then in our when match clause, updating the IDs of those tasks that have supervisors. And for people that don't have their own tasks, then this join returns nothing, and they would normally fall into the when not match clause, so we could do an insert. But here we want to do an update only. That's all we want to do. And the big advantage here is we can scan each of these tables just once. So previously we had to ask, query the task tables 3 times, or access it 3 times. Now we're accessing it just twice, and we're not having to rerun this join here over and over again for every single task. So this can be potentially a lot more efficient than the previous correlated update approach that we wanted. So has anyone got questions or comments on that, or think more they want to know on correlated updates or merges and so on? And like I say, if you do have a use case for an insert only merge, I'd love to hear it. I yet to think of one, because you could just do the straight insert select instead, but maybe there's a reason that I just can't think of. So please let us know in chat if you have one of those use cases. Okay, so I'm not seeing anything particular come in. So let's look. So our table now will look like this, and we've run the merge and we've fixed everything. So now we're in a situation where Stephen has always got the same supervisor ID. We've taken it from his own task and assigned it here. So we fixed the problem here, or we fixed the problem that we were given, in the sense that we said, you know, we've got this update, it's failing, how do we sort it out? But what we really have here is we've got a solution as a requirement. So we're saying what the requirement really is to ensure that someone always has the same supervisor ID for a particular name. So, you know, these are always the same. So supervisor ID always maps to Stephen, and Stephen always maps to supervisor ID 2. And so the solution here is to do an update to sort this problem out. But really, we need to step back and look at the requirement and say, what is it we're trying to do here? Okay, so before we get on with that, the question coming from Sagar, if we use single inserts and bulk inserts, is there any difference in the way index data gets populated, ordered, or non-ordered for both cases? So when you add row to the table, the database has to update all the indexes on those rows or on the values that you insert. Now, an index is always an ordered data structure. So the database still has to put the values in the correct location. So it has to kind of go, well, you know, we've got the values 1 to 10. Currently in the index, you insert 5, it's going to kind of go in the middle of the index. If you insert 11, it's going to go off to the right-hand edge. If you insert 0, it's going to go off to the left-hand edge of the index. So indexes are always ordered data structures, and things always have to go in the correct location in that. And whether you use single inserts or bulk inserts doesn't affect that. So I'm not sure what you're asking there in terms of ordered or non-ordered versus single inserts versus bulk inserts. If you can expand a bit more on that, that would be keen to hear. Okay, how to retrieve the number of lines for insert and for update when we use merge. So how do you know whether you did an insert or a merge? Is that what you're asking? An insert or an update with merge, Alan? Is that what you're asking? And the short answer is, I don't think you can know. So you know how many rows in total that the merge affected. Your SQL row count will tell you the total number of rows that were inserted or updated. But if you're looking for, let's say you processed 10 rows, you updated 5 and you inserted 5, I'm not aware of an inbuilt way to retrieve that information so you know which rows are which. Now, what you can do as part of your merge, so we just flick back up, add some extra metadata columns to it. So when your update, you set a last updated column or something like that, and in your insert, set an insert date column. So you can identify them that way. You know at the time it happened, and you can see which was insert or update. But I'm not aware of a way that you can find after the fact through things like SQL %row count, which was which. You have to kind of build it in manually to say what it is you actually did.
So I think, Chris, we added a function in 12C for doing this.
Oh, okay. Did we? Okay, go on.
Which is along the lines of what you were saying, except you don't have to manually code it.
Okay.
I can't remember what it was exactly called, but you create it with 2 timestamps, which has the update, a sort of a begin and an end date, and then I think you can find out. Oh, I think somebody's posted it from Oracle Developer Net. I thought you could then find out if when we did an update on a row, it was an update or a merge. I'd have to look into it. I can't remember. Sorry, if it was an update or an insert or a delete.
Okay. Yes. So does that relate to the? Is that related to the flashback columns you're thinking of, Keith, or is that like the?
Yeah, I think it might be something to do with flashback.
Yes, I think I know what you're talking about now. Yes, you're right. And I forget off the top of my head exactly what they are as well. But it's something you have to interrogate the table afterwards for, essentially, isn't it?
Yeah. But I don't think you've got to have certain features enabled. So it's not. I don't think it's something you can just set up and assume that it's working on your environment. I think there are certain features that we need enabling in the background to make it work.
Cool. Okay. If you find more about that, Keith, let us know. Otherwise, I think we'll move back to Sagar's question. Single inserts, doing simple insert statements to load data into tables, bulk inserts using nested table. So I get what you mean by the difference between single inserts and bulk inserts. I'm not sure what you're asking about in terms of the effect on index population and so on. If there's something now, if we kind of forget the index side of it for a minute, then you can single inserts. Let's say you're inserting 100 rows. If you're doing that single insert one row at a time, that's 100 statements that you're sending to the database, and there's a little bit of work that we have to do to process those. If, on the other hand, you're using bulk collection and for all processing, then you're sending one statement to this database, and you can get good performance gains by doing that. This is something me and Stephen talked about in the session 2 days ago. So if you look at the recording of the SQL Office Hours session 2 days ago, whichever, the 7th of August, we talked about this in more detail. So if you want to know more about that, then look at that talk there, where we just cover some of the things about collections. So I think that's worth checking out there. Yep, and as Judith says, we can use to count rows in the merge as well. Yeah, that's another approach. I think it's one of those, Alan, is probably one of those things where you have to say, well, what are you trying to achieve? Why do you want to know what was what and what's going on? So if you got a specific requirement or a specific reason for wanting to know that, then perhaps we could tailor a solution to do that. Okay, from Mark, does merge like update bomb on very large updates? Basically, is the underlying logic the same? So I'm not sure what you mean when you say that update bombs on very large updates, Mark. Can you expand on what you mean, or which errors you're thinking of when that happens? So, I mean, in terms of the underlying logic for an update in the merge, I understand it's very similar. Updating a lot of records can take forever, basically shuts the machine down. Okay, so yeah, when you update a row, then you have blocked it and stopped anyone else from updating or deleting that row. So that's one problem with running really large updates. You can end up blocking everyone out your database if your application does a lot of updates on that table or deletes. So that's one problem. Essentially, everyone's stuck waiting for the update to finish. The other problem is that updates tend to generate a lot of redo and undo. So the database has to do a lot of journaling, a lot of housekeeping to keep track of what it's actually changing. And yes, when it comes to merge, we still got to do all that same work. You're still going to lock the rows to prevent anyone else changing them, and we still have to keep track of the redo and undo. So there's a lot of work that's happening there. But if you've got an update that's shutting the machine down, I'd be interested to hear exactly what your experience is there, or what you've been trying to do that's you've seen that effect? You know, is it that everyone's blocked waiting to get to update the row, so that they're not actually doing anything, but the application still grinds to a halt? Or are you consuming so many database resources that there's no CPU or disk or whatever left for anyone else? I'd be curious to see that, because I've, other than the blocking problem, I haven't really run into the problem where updates will just eat up the whole resources on the machine. It had a single field update on 500,000 records run for over 24 hours on X data, and it still didn't finish. Not blocking, this is in a data warehouse. Any chance there was some triggers on those, on that table? That's, one of the common things to look for is like, when you update a huge number of rows, because even no triggers, it was naked data. Interesting. We're using EHCC. No indexes. Yeah, triggers not index foreign keys. Quite good question. Is DB running on a Raspberry Pi? No indexes, no nothing.
The only thing I'm wondering is whether they're using Exadata hybrid column compression on it.
Okay.
Or something.
So can you explain a bit about that? Why that might be an issue, Keith? Or
well, I'm guessing we end up having to start decompressing.
Okay.
And if you've gone query high, I'm guessing at that point, we end up consuming. Well, I guess the question is, where is the issue? Is it, if it's I/O bound, is it an I/O bound issue or CPU bound?
Yeah.
Where were the resources going?
Yeah. I mean, it's saying an update of 500,000 rows taking 24 hours. That sounds fishy. Even my laptop could manage that.
Yeah.
Something's wrong there, Mark. Something's very wrong. You need to figure out what's actually happening there. So I think as Keith says, you've got to look at what's actually happening, trace the session if you can while it's running, or just see collect whatever metrics after the fact you can find, see what was going on. Because to take that long, 500,000 rows isn't trivial, but it still should take nowhere near 24 hours.
No, so there should be something in the AWR report.
You'd think, yeah.
That length of time.
Yeah. So I got a solution from the developer who's working, and it hasn't resurfaced. So okay, fair enough. Well, if you have AW reports available and you're able to dig into those, or want to know more, then that's probably the best place to kind of speak to it. Help us figure out what was going on, discuss what's going on. We're sort of curious since we're on the topic. Yeah. Like I say, I think something's gone on there, because there's no way it should have taken in like that long. And yeah, as I was saying, do you have the same explain planning, cache, and AWR? It just ran and ran. Yeah, not sure. I don't think. Have you got anything else to suggest, Keith? Or
no, other than tracing it. But
okay. Well, if it's not causing you a problem now, I think we'll move on. And if you want to follow this up in future session, and you dig out details, then let us know, and we can come back to that. Okay, so let's kind of move on. It sounds like you've kind of got that particular issue under control, Mark. So let's return to our table here. So as I said, we kind of had our solution as a requirement. We run an update to make sure that everyone's supervisor ID matches their name, so that they always stay the same. But really, we've actually got a design failure here, and that is the table is not in third normal form. So some of you may or may not be familiar with normal forms, and this is the process of splitting up your tables to reduce redundancy. And the good test to check whether or not you're in third normal form is to say, if you update one column that isn't a primary or unique key, does that imply you also have to update another column at the same time? So here in our design here, if we change either the ID or the supervisor ID, we can see there's a relationship here. Updating one of those columns implies we probably also need to update the name column. So we're saying if we have I and name, and yeah, as Dennis is saying as well, where's the Big Boss record in your table? We've also got the problem that because Big Boss doesn't have any tasks of their own, well, what happens if all of Stephen's tasks get deleted? Well, then we've got no entry for Big Boss at all. He just disappears from the system and he's gone. But presumably, we still have a CEO. There's always going to, even when they change, there's someone who will replace them. So there's some failures of design here. And we've got a dependency. So we're saying the name depends on the ID. And if I was to change the ID, so I was running an update, maybe someone else has got the task do stuff. So we're going to change that to 3. Let's say Stephen's given that to Dan or Connor. It implies we also have to change the name at the same time. So we've got a failure of design here. So what we really need to do, and the real correct solution to this problem, is actually to normalize the table. So what we need to do is take off the kind of remove those dependencies. So we start off with our task table here, and we've got IDs and names, supervisor and supervisor names. We need to create a new table, a person, people table, whatever we want to call it, which stores those IDs and their names. So what we're having is a new table like this. And now we'll have to go through a process of deprecating off name and supervisor name from the task table. Ultimately, you'll probably drop these. It's not something you would do, or you'd have to be very brave to do in your first instance when you first create this person table, because should anything go wrong, well, your fallback is you have to recover that information to the task table from a backup. That's going to be painful. So our first step is just to create this person table, which stores all the IDs and their names. This avoids a couple of problems. First up, it now means we've got a single place to manage names. So if we realize there's a spelling mistake or whatever, and we need to change it, we just change it in one place. It also avoids the problem that Dennis just mentioned about Big Boss. Well, we can still have a row for Big Boss, even when he's got no tasks assigned to him, or they've got no tasks assigned to them. So that's the real solution here. We've got to take this table and split it up into 2. So that's great, but this is the kind of thing which makes a lot of people scared. They're going to go, hang on a second, Chris, we're talking about splitting these 2 tables. I've got who knows how much code accessing this task table. Are you telling me you're going to have to go through all that code, review it all, check to see how it accesses the task table, and either change it to a join or change the inserts and so on? That is a potentially humongous amount of work, and particularly with a lot of spaghetti type applications or database topologies that some of you may have either be currently working with or have dealt with in the past. Fully identifying all those relationships and issues can be a problem, or can be tricky. You never know whether some little application sat in it which is just used by one person that everyone else has forgotten about, and what happens, how do you update that? So there's always a risk that there's something using that task table and you just overlooked it. So how can we do this in a kind of more lightweight way? How can we do this in a way that's going to actually reduce our code maintenance? Well, one approach you can take is to create a view over the top of them. So we create our tasks view, which recreates the original tasks table. So it joins those 2 tables together, but takes in the names from the person or the people table instead. So that's great, we've got our view, but how does that help us? Well, what we can do is change our code and point it at the view instead. So rather than accessing the task table, we can now say everything goes against the view. That's fine for queries. They'll all just work as they currently do. But what about DML, inserts, updates, and so on? Well, what you can do is create an instead of insert or update trigger on the view itself. So we can trigger that looks a bit like this, instead of insert on that. And what this does is intercepts it and then splits it out into all the relevant table. So we can see we've got an insert into the task table for the task itself, and then 2 people inserts, one for the person who's doing the task and one for their supervisor. Okay, so that's great. We've got this trigger, so we can now do all DML against the view, but we still got to go through all that code and change it to use the view, right? So how is this actually any better? How has this helped us? Well, there are several techniques you could use to kind of make this change kind of invisible. So here's 3 that I've thought, or 3 I kind of propose. One is to just kind of rename everything. So we start off with a tasks table. We rename it to tasks_old or task tab or something like that, and then create the view with the name tasks. So now all the code will just use the view. And this is, everything that was using the table will now use the view. That's great, but should you discover any problems, if there was some mistake in you creating that view or something else, and you need to go back to using that tasks table, well, you've got to go to reverse the process. It's more effort to undo that. You're going to have to rename the table again and drop the view or rename the view. So this sounds great, but it has a lot of risk in the sense that if something goes wrong, getting back is tricky, or it's trickier. Another technique you could use is that if you have no code in the table owner, so either all your PL SQL is in another schema, or all the application SQL, if you've got SQL in your application tier, that's connecting to the database as a user that doesn't own the tables, something you absolutely thoroughly should do. If that has synonyms back to the tables themselves, all you can do is repoint the synonyms from the table to the view. So sounds simple, kind of straightforward, but again, you've got to be in a situation where no code actually exists, or no PL SQL code exists in the table schema, or nothing connects to the table owner using that table name directly. Otherwise, because you can't have a synonym with the same name as the table in their one schema. So that sounds good, but it may not be feasible. And for certainly a lot of applications I've worked on, that just wouldn't work. Another technique potentially you can use is something called addition-based redefinition. So what this is entirely designed for is kind of these kind of online updates. So where you've got structural changes that you need to make to your tables, and you need to do it in an online manner while people are using your application. So this is what EBR was designed for and can help you with. So I think EBR would be my preferred solution here, but potentially you've got to do a lot of setup work potentially to actually have that in place. And here you've got to do the cost-benefit analysis. I have actually done this kind of approach myself in the past, so splitting a table and replacing it with a view in a shop that did use EBR. So this does work, and it is something that is entirely possible. It is a lot quicker than refactoring all your tables. It's a lot safer than having to go through all those updates. But you do need to be in a position to actually be able to use it. So so that was kind of the stuff I had prepared in advance. Anyone got any questions on comments on what I've just covered in terms of normalizing how we'd manage that process and do so in a kind of safe way? It would be great to see a session dedicated to EBR and examples of its usage once in the future. Since I heard a lot about it, read the white paper, but still kind of scared. Yes, I think that's a good thing. Good request there, Dennis. It is a very powerful feature. It's very useful. So Bryn Llewellyn, who's the product manager, PM for this, he has a lot of content on it. I think, I have used this, and it is a very useful technique. You do need to make sure that you kind of thoroughly understand, or it's fully documented in your process and you understand how it works. Because it is very easy to get yourself caught out if you are not fully aware of how it works and what it's doing. So I think a session on that, and that's something we could look at in the future. Yeah. But I would say, yeah, there are some, thanks Judith for sharing that. So Oren Nakdiman, I think that's how you say his name. He works for a company who very publicly discussed about the fact that they do use EBR to manage their application upgrades. Like I say, you need to be careful, but it's also worth bearing in mind the advantages it can give you. So where I used EBR, the technology was brought, or the goal of EBR is to enable you to do zero downtime releases or patching of your database schema without any outage. So you can change everything while the application keeps running and nobody knows. That's the ultimate goal of it. But the fact is, although there's lots of applications which do need constant 24/7 uptime, chances are most of you work or have worked on an application where you can get some form of outage relatively frequently, maybe once a month, maybe once a week, but you can get small outages relatively frequently. You don't really need that absolutely solid 24/7 uptime. And this is the situation we're in when we introduced EBR. We didn't need 24/7 uptime. We didn't need zero downtime releases, but it was a small IT team. And the database patching was something that was done overnight. That would require, DBA, developer, tester, PM, and so on. A whole group of people that needed to be online and available to actually do the release, make sure it worked, test everything thoroughly, and back it out if anything went wrong. So that was actually a significant number of the total staff. And if you got those people in overnight, well, they're not going to be working the next day. What EBR allowed us to do was deploy database releases during the day and get more prepared, make sure they actually worked, test them, validate them, ensure everything was fine, and then have a small outage overnight when it came to actually switching and making that new functionality available. So, it does potentially bring a lot of benefits. One of the key big advantages, I think, is it helps de-risk production releases, particularly if you're in an environment where you've not got good control of your database code. You're not sure whether deploying a package, whether it's going to error or not. That's not a good situation to be in. With EBR, because you can actually have multiple versions of your SQL, you can deploy to a new version nobody's using, check it actually works and validate it, and do some live testing. There's always the expression, there ain't no test like a live test. Well, what this allows you to do is actually do production testing while your existing application, the old version of the application, is still running and your users are just merrily working away doing whatever it was. So do take it up, and I will think about that. Oh yeah, I agree. A session would be nice. It is a big topic, and it's worth having a session in its own right. So yes, I've added it to the list of things to cover. Okay, thanks, Dennis. Anyone got any other questions on that? So, I see there's questions come to me privately. If you're asking questions, can you please just put them in the public chat so everyone can see them? Because other people may be able to help you as well. And that may help. Sorry, I'm just looking back through this question that came in. Couple of dedicated sessions request, materialized views, running SQLs on Exadata, special recommendations or gotchas. Is there anything particular you want to know about materialized views, Sagar? Yes, fast refresh. New capabilities introduced in 18C specifically. I'm not sure there was anything new for materialized views in 18C, was there, Keith? I think there was some new stuff in 12.2 with the new procs functions, though, wasn't there?
Yeah. I don't think there's anything in 18C. Otherwise, it would have been on that list of that PowerPoint deck that I sent you.
Mm-hmm.
I think the MV stuff is in 12C. There's things like changes to fast refresh, I think, and things like that.
Oh yes, because there's on-statement refreshes as well in 12.2, isn't there? Where it will refresh immediately after you run an insert rather than having to do it manually. Yes. So actually, is that? No, I don't think that's in that thing that you sent. Okay. MVs are always a welcome topic. Okay. When it's available and how to enable fast refresh for a PL SQL pipeline function-based MV, can you explain a bit more about what you mean by a PL SQL pipeline function-based materialized view, Dennis? But yes, fast refreshing is one of those things that's fiddly, to say the least. You know, I've spent countless hours, maybe even days or weeks, you know, messing around with materialized views, trying to figure out why they couldn't enable fast refresh on them. Okay, so that's something that I can take in. When a materialized view is based on a query from a pipeline function. Okay, so you've got a pipeline function and you're using it in your materialized view. Okay. I'm not sure you can fast refresh those, but I'd have to check that. I don't know if you know more about that, Keith, or?
I can't think off the top of my head, but yeah, no, I'm not going to say that it's restricted, but I can't remember for what the exact requirements are to be able to do a fast refresh.
Oh yeah, there's that there's the capabilities table, which is something when I was fiddling with these a lot, I got to know intimately, and I've now it was a while ago, so I don't fully remember anymore. But yes, okay, so that's a good request. That is visual complex and cannot be fast refreshed. Yeah, well, I think
yes.
That's for sure. You're right there, it is visual complex. I think the thing is you don't have a materialized view log on a pipelines table on a pipeline function, so I don't even see how it could be fast refreshed. But yeah, it is worth covering off some of the other things that make off. I think the docs are nice and vague about this, and they say something like, you know, complex queries can't be fast refresh, which is really helpful when you're trying to figure out why your materialized view doesn't work. Okay, so there was okay. All right then. So and so Sagar, also you've got a request on running SQLs on Exadata. Exadata is not my field of expertise, unfortunately, but I'm sure we can find someone who may be able to help with those questions in the future. Yes. So Hachemi, any recommendation about time-based table? Can you give us a bit more detail about what you mean there in terms of time-based table?
I see there's another request there for your Open World 1 session. Sagar's asking for new capabilities introduced in 18C.
Ah, yes. Yeah.
I seem to remember you have a session at Open World on that.
Yeah, 18-ish, about 18 things in 18C. So, yes, there's quite a lot of good new stuff in 18C. So definitely that's something we can look at covering in a future session.
Oh, the effective date, start date, end date. This is the temporal stuff that we added.
Yes. When we use effective date, start date, end. Yeah, there's dates. Dealing with date ranges like this is always tricky. So we introduced some functionality around temporal handling. So there's a temporal validity and flashback data archive, which can help manage this. But this is something where you need to be really clear about what your requirements are and what you're trying to achieve, because people get mixed up and they always get it wrong. Or someone always gets it wrong. You ask 3 developers to come up with a effective start and end date range functionality, and you'll end up with at least 4 different solutions, because everyone has their own bad approach, and someone always changes their mind partway through. So it's an interesting topic. You're right, Hachemi, but you need to be really clear about what it is you're trying to achieve. I don't know if you've got anything else you want to add on that, Keith, or...
No, I think you're right. It's the business case. That's what you've got to nail down. Because the functionality is there in terms of we'll provide you with the columns, but it's up to you to define the business rules. We provide you with the structures, but that's like 1/10 of the problem. As you're saying, the main problem is, what is the business rule?
Yeah, otherwise you can then easily end up with a thing where you either double count or don't count things which happen when a date range ends or starts and so on, and it's tricky. Okay, so another comment from Judith. If our mostly MV data remains the same, then maybe a merge can mimic a fast refresh more efficiently. Maybe some sessions on designing temporary data could be interesting. Yeah, I do have, well, maybe I might dig out one of my old presentations on temporal, cover that in a future session. Okay, are there any more specific questions, things people want to know? I've got lots of requests for future topics, so that's good. So we've got things like material views, temporal, and new capabilities in 18C. I guess actually we could pick out some of the stuff in 18C particularly. Should we talk about polymorphic table functions a bit, Keith? That seems to be the...
That's probably the hottest topic for developers, yeah.
Yeah, so let me just bring the slides up for that, and if I can share my screen again. Where's the share screen? There we get. All right, hopefully you've got something on the screen now. All right then, and if I go to, where is it? I've gone past it, haven't I? There we go, polymorphic table functions. Do you want to talk about this, Keith, or should I?
I'll let you, because my builders have come back.
Oh, your builders. Okay.
I'm a little bit concerned that any minute now the radio's going to start going.
It's going to be blaring. Okay, so I'll start talking. If I say anything wrong or you want to add anything, just chip in, Keith. All right. Okay. So what is polymorphic table functions? So these are functions that allow you to manipulate the result set, so the columns that appear in it. So as it says here, they use defined functions that you can call on the from clause. So if you're familiar with table functions, pipeline table functions, it's a similar concept, but instead of generating rows, you're actually adding or removing columns from your result set. And what you can do to this is you can pass a table into the function itself. So you say you've got your table T, you're going to make that your input to your PTF, and then you can manipulate the columns that are in the results. And you can have some really complex functionality within the function itself. I'm not too familiar on the non-leaf stuff, so can you talk through this, Keith, quickly, or?
Yeah, so this depends on the type of input and the type of table you're trying to generate, whether you're trying to replicate additional columns in your data set or add additional rows, or in effect create a new summary data set where you're reducing rows and taking out columns and producing a whole new result set. So and so it goes on. So there are different, if you like, patterns for using PTF. So these are the sort of the basic high-level patterns that we have. And I think if you go to the next slide, it will go into a little more detail.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. Yes. Okay, and this is, say we've got row versus table semantics. So row semantics is where each row you can assign a particular value to columns, and table semantics is
where you actually operate on the whole set.
Right, okay. Yes, this is an area where I'm a bit shaky. So let's, as you say, we don't have leaf PTFs yet, so let's move on. So one of the great things about these is they're part of the SQL engine. So a lot of the optimizations, all the things we've been building for the past decades, you've got a lot of that functionality in there. So things like parallel, just kind of works out the box and so on. So these are potentially very efficient ways of doing some complex logic inside a SQL table as a result. So what this will do is then show a very brief example. There are lots of examples of how to do this in the docs. We've also put some examples on Live SQL. If you want to know more about this, go through them, have a look, because there's a lot to this feature. But what we'll just show to start with is that first thing you need is a package. So this is like the engine of the PTF. It tells the database how to actually construct it, what the result set's going to look like, and then how to assign values to particularly new columns in that result set. And so the describe function is saying which columns you want to show in the output. And you can see passing in our table name here and the columns we want to display in it, and we can also add new columns to it. Open and close, we're not going to, I don't think are covered in this one, and fetch rows, we're going to use that to assign values to new columns. So that's the engine. Next thing you need to create is the PTF itself, the function you're going to call in your SQL statement. This can be part of the package, or you can be a standalone function that looks like this. So we got this, pipelined row polymorphic clause. And notice we're using, so the package here, echo package, is the one that we just implemented a stage ago. And so, sorry, the question, there are no examples in the documentation for PTFs with table semantics. All the examples are with row semantics. So we need a deeper understanding of the entire processing flow of a PTF. Yeah. Okay, so good point, Judith. We'll have to come back to that. And from Dennis, have I got it right? With the PTF, we'll be able to reforge any JSON object or a CSV document with a preliminary unknown structure to a tabular view, so we can query it using traditional SQL. You can do that. I mean, one of the things, if you're using JSON objects, we actually already have a lot of functionality for manipulating JSON in the database already. So there are things like JSON table, which you can use to take a JSON document and return it to its convert it to its relational format. And there's JSON object and JSON functions, which you can take relational data and convert it to a JSON document. So if you're working with JSON, look at those. Those are probably actually the right feature rather than PTFs for doing that, Dennis. But yes, you're right. You could do things like convert a CSV. So I built a CSV to columns converter, which you can see on Live SQL. So let's see, Polymorphic, dynamic CSV to columns converter. So what this does is we're passing in a CSV data, and I say I want 2 columns in the output, and you can see it gives us 2 columns in the output. Or we can pass in a table with 4 columns, and we can say we want 4 columns. So you potentially could do it to do that kind of conversion and convert that. Wow, finally, yes. It's also worth bearing in mind 18C has inline external tables. So if this CSV file exists on your database server, or it's accessible to the database server, rather than having to create a traditional external table, you can actually literally paste the definition into your SQL query. So there's a couple of techniques which might help you there for working with CSV data. So if you want to know, look at this example on Live SQL there for an idea of how you might do it in PTS, or there's inline external tables which you can use to read kind of any file on your system. So let's return to back where we were. So we had our package, we created our PTF, and we've got our describe function. So what's actually going in here? So the thing it needs to do, so this DBMSTF trace, this is instrumentation or logging telling you what's actually going on. Again, because it's a black box, it can be tricky to figure what's going on when you're actually implementing these. So these trace functions are very useful to help you understand what it's doing and debug it, why it's going wrong, what it's trying to do. So there's some functionality in there to help with that. And we'll see we're fetching the rows, so we're getting the columns, and we're going to put those out, and we'll just end the trace there. So as we can see here, we've got our echo function, and we pass in the emp, classic Scott emp table, and we just want to echo the ename and job columns. So what this done is just added these 2 new columns on the end here, and you can see it's prefixed the name with echo dash and the job with echo dash. So we can do this to take values, come in, manipulate those, and pipe them out and do whatever we want. So as I said, that PTFs are a big feature, and it's probably worth spending some time on their own talking about them, but hopefully that gives you some idea of what they can do and what actually goes on. When it comes to the execution plan, we see this lovely polymorphic table function step in the plan, so you can use that to see and identify what's actually going on. We're coming up to the hour. Don't know if there's anything quick you want to add on that, Keith, before we wrap up.
No, that's pretty good. I have got a session at Open World that will, now that 18C is fully out, that will look at to try and address this issue we have in the docs about the amount of information that we've provided. I think I'm right in saying, please don't quote me on this, but I think I'm right in saying when we first brought this out on 18C, some of the stuff that you've been talking about, like being able to do the SQL CSV transformation, wasn't actually possible.
Mm-hmm.
So when we released this into the cloud as 18C, we didn't have all of the capabilities there. Hence, the documentation at the moment is a little bit light on some of the topics, because we had stuff scheduled, like being able to do what you did with CSVs, which in effect is there's no input, or there's very little input, and you materialize a table out of it. That's coming later on. Hence, Doc has now got to sort of try and quickly catch up. So when I get to Open World, I'm going to do another one on particular patterns for using PTFs. So hopefully that will overcome some of the questions that have come up about I want to do A or B and it's not in the documentation yet, or there's no examples in the documentation.
Cool. that sounds great, Keith. I think that would be really useful and help people understand or know when they should or shouldn't be using this feature. Okay then, so just one last thing I see from Dennis. Will it be possible to base an Apex report on a PTF? Well, it's just a query. So as far as I know, you can base Apex reports on queries. So the answer is yes. You know, it's just like any other Apex report on a query, but you've got to figure out, wait.
The difficulty is with Apex is that it hard codes. It sets up structures in advance of these are the columns that I'm expecting.
Okay, I see.
So as long as the polymorphic table has a structure, a given structure that you don't change, then yes, you could, because it's, as you say, it's just like a table. But if you are, for example, doing something that is where you give it a file, the CSV file, and push that in and then push a button in Apex and you get a whole new report, and you could use that report and put another file in and it would redesign the report on the screen. I don't think Apex does that.
Yeah. Yes, I see what you mean. Yes. So the answer is, if it's a static PTF, yes. If it's not, we'll have to wait and see, I think is the answer there, isn't it? Okay then. Well, I think, what's the purpose to use PTF for a static structure? I'll go for traditional pipelined. Well, we might want to generate columns where there might be a specific set of additional columns you want to generate. So if we look back at this echo here, we know we only want to add those 2 columns. And if that's the way it's going to be used, then you can, the functionality for generating these values is complicated. So that's why you've used PTF.
You might, for example, you might say look at salary, and you might have very complicated models for calculating commission, where you could, in effect, encode that business logic in the PTF, and it would compute the commission for each salesperson. Maybe the commission's based on data coming in from a separate sales line item table, and there are different commission rates each day or something, depending on exchange rates, whatever it is. And you could embed all that business logic inside the PTF and then just call this table and it would compute the commission correctly each time.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's designed for dynamic structures, but just because it allows that doesn't necessarily mean you need to use that. It's time to run for the Apex one. Yes. What is it? Yes. So great points, Judith. You've got to know how to interrogate it. Okay. So as some of you probably want to head off to the Apex one, and we're just past the hour, and I'm sure we've all got other stuff we need to do today. I just want to thank you all for joining me, and thanks, Keith, for your input as well. It's been really good to have you join me. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you all. Goodbye.